Mark, can I confess something a little embarrassing?
Now I'm curious. What happened?
Yesterday, I wanted to ask my friend something simple, and I completely froze.
That happens to everyone. What were you trying to say?
I wanted to ask if she was busy yesterday.
Okay, sounds simple.
Yes, but my brain started fighting itself.
Oh no.
I kept thinking, did you busy yesterday? Were you busy yesterday? Did you were busy yesterday?
Ah, the classic battle.
Exactly. My brain just stopped working.
And let me guess. The more you thought about it, the worse it got.
Much worse.
You're not alone. This is one of the most common confusions in English.
Really?
Absolutely. Students understand the words. But when they speak, did, was, and were start fighting each other.
That's exactly how it feels.
Like 3 buttons in your brain, and you don't know which one to press.
Yes, and when I guess, I feel like I'm probably wrong.
Well, today we're going to fix that.
Please tell me there is a simple explanation.
There is, and the best part?
What?
It's not about memorizing grammar rules.
Thank goodness.
It's about understanding what your brain is actually trying to say.
Okay? Now I'm curious.
By the end of this video, you'll know exactly when to use disathastis in D, when to use was obondet, when to use were.
And hopefully I won't say, did you busy yesterday? Ever again.
Hopefully not.
So where do we start?
We start with the biggest mistake people make.
Now I'm nervous.
Don't worry. You probably already made it today.
Okay. So what is this big mistake people make?
Most people think the problem is grammar.
Isn't it?
Not really. The real problem is that people don't realize they're asking 2 completely different types of questions.
2 types.
Yes, your brain is trying to ask something about the past, but it hasn't decided what kind of thing you're talking about.
I'm not sure I understand.
Let me ask you something simple.
Okay?
If I ask you this question, did you eat breakfast? What am I asking about?
That's easy. You're asking about an action,
Exactly. Eating is something you do.
right?
Now listen to this question. Were you hungry? Is that an action?
No. That's a feeling.
Exactly. It's a state, not something you do.
So you're saying these are 2 completely different kinds of questions.
Exactly. One is about actions, and the other is about situations or states.
Wait, so maybe that's why my brain gets confused.
That's exactly why.
Because sometimes I don't know if I'm asking about something someone did or something they were.
Perfectly said.
So when I say something like, did you busy yesterday? My brain is mixing the 2.
Exactly. Your brain started with did, which is used for actions. But busy is not an action.
Oh wow.
Busy is just describing how someone felt.
So it's like asking a question in the wrong category.
Yes, it's like asking, did you tall?
That sounds terrible.
Exactly. Because tall isn't something you do.
It's something you are.
Exactly.
So if it's something you are, we don't use did.
Correct?
We use was or were.
Now you're already thinking like a native speaker.
Wait, so the real question is not past or present.
Right.
The real question is it an action or a description?
Exactly.
That actually makes the whole thing feel less scary.
That's the goal. English becomes much easier when you stop thinking about rules and start thinking about meaning.
Okay, let me test this idea.
Go for it.
If I want to ask you about something you did yesterday, I say, did you work yesterday?
Perfect.
But if I want to ask about how you felt yesterday, I say, were you tired yesterday?
Exactly.
So did is connected to actions.
Yes,
And were are connected to descriptions.
exactly.
Okay? I feel like something just clicked in my brain.
Good, but don't celebrate yet.
Why not?
Because there is one detail about did that causes even more confusion.
Oh no, what is it?
When it appears in a question, something strange happens to the verb.
Strange how?
The verb suddenly becomes very simple.
Now, I'm confused again.
Don't worry. In the next part, you'll see exactly what I mean.
Okay, now you've made me curious. You said something strange happens to the verb when we use did. And honestly, this is exactly the part that always makes me nervous when I'm speaking, because sometimes I hear people say things like, did you go? And other times I hear learners say, did you went? And both of them sound possible when you're still learning. When you're in the middle of a conversation, your brain starts asking questions like, wait, is it past tense? Should I say went? Or does the verb stay normal? And when that doubt appears, everything slows down. Suddenly, you're not thinking about the conversation anymore, you're thinking about grammar. So what exactly is happening there?
That confusion is incredibly common, and the reason is actually very simple once you see it clearly. When did appears in a question, it already carries the idea of the past. In other words, the past tense is already present in the sentence because of the word did itself, and that means the main verb no longer needs to change into the past form. Think of it this way. If the sentence already has one word showing the past, the verb doesn't need to show it again. English prefers to keep things balanced. So when we say, did you go? The word did is already doing the job of marking the past. Because of that, the verb stays in its simplest form, the base verb.
So the verb actually becomes simpler, not more complicated. That's interesting, because when students panic, they often try to add more past tense instead of less. They think it's a past question, so I must use the past verb, and that's how we get sentences like, did you went or did you ate? But from what you're saying, that's exactly the opposite of what English wants.
Exactly. When did arrives, the verb relaxes. It goes back to its base form. So instead of saying, did you went? We say, did you go? Instead of, did you ate? We say, did you eat? And instead of, did you watch the movie? We say, did you watch the movie? It feels strange at first, especially because learners spend so much time memorizing past verbs like went, ate, saw, and watched. But the moment did enters the sentence, those past forms are no longer needed.
That actually explains a lot of the hesitation people feel, because in real conversations, your brain is trying to move fast. If you suddenly have to remember irregular verbs while forming a question, everything slows down. But if the rule is simply did plus base verb, that makes the structure much easier to produce while speaking.
Exactly. It's actually one of the reasons English speakers rely on did so much when asking questions about the past. It simplifies the sentence. Instead of worrying about different past forms, you just keep the verb simple. For example, did you see the game last night? Did you finish your work? Did you call your friend? In every case, the verb stays in its base form. See, finish, call.
Let me try a few examples, because that's usually when the idea really clicks. If I want to ask you about dinner yesterday, I would say, did you cook dinner yesterday? Not, did you cooked?
Perfect.
And if I want to ask about a movie, did you watch the movie? Not, did you watched?
Exactly.
And if I'm asking about sleep, did you sleep well last night? That one feels natural already.
That's a great example. And notice something important about all these questions. They are asking about things someone did. Actions. Cooking, watching, sleeping, calling, going. These are all activities. That's why did is the right tool.
So in a way, did is like the signal that we're entering the action world. If the question is about something someone actually did is the door that opens the sentence.
That's a great way to think about it. The moment you realize you're talking about an action in the past, your brain can simply choose did and keep the verb simple. That removes a huge amount of mental pressure when you're speaking.
I like that idea a lot. Because one of the biggest problems learners have is that they try to think about grammar rules while talking, and the more rules they remember, the slower they become. But if the rule is just action equals did, that's something the brain can recognize very quickly.
Exactly. But now comes the moment where many learners accidentally create a completely different mistake.
Oh no, another trap.
A very common one. People understand that did works with actions, but then they try to use did with things that are not actions at all.
Let me guess. Words like busy or tired.
Exactly. And that's where was and were enter the conversation.
So that's where the second half of this puzzle begins.
Exactly. Because once you understand actions, the next step is understanding descriptions.
So if did belongs to the world of actions, that already clears up a lot of confusion. But I think the next question many learners have is this: what happens when we're not talking about something someone did? Because in real conversations, we don't just talk about actions. Very often we talk about how someone felt, where someone was, or what a situation was like. For example, I might want to ask you something like, "Were you tired yesterday?" Or "Were you at home last night?" In these moments, it doesn't feel like an action at all. No one is doing anything. We're just describing a situation or a state. And this is exactly where students start hesitating again. Because they wonder if did should still be used, or if something else is needed.
Exactly. And this is where the second half of the puzzle becomes clear. When we talk about things like feelings, conditions, or locations, English doesn't treat them as actions. Instead, they are considered states or descriptions. And descriptions don't use did. They use the verb to be in the past, which gives us was and were. These words help us describe what a situation was like at a particular moment in the past. For example, if I want to ask about your condition yesterday, I might say, "Were you tired yesterday?" If I want to ask about your mood, I might ask, "Were you happy at the party?" And if I want to ask about your location, I might ask, "Were you at the office this morning?" None of these involve an action. They simply describe a state or situation.
That actually explains why sentences like, "Did you tired yesterday?" sound so strange. When learners say something like that, they're trying to use did, which belongs to actions, with a word that isn't an action at all. Words like tired, busy, hungry, happy, or angry are not things we do. They're just ways to describe how someone feels or what their situation is. So the brain is mixing two systems together. It's like pressing the wrong button on a machine.
Exactly. And once you see that difference, the structure becomes much easier. If the word after the person describes a feeling, a condition, or a place, your brain should automatically move toward was or were. For example, were you busy yesterday? Was she at work this morning? Were they happy about the news? Each of these sentences is describing a state in the past. Nothing is being done. We are simply describing what things were like.
I also notice that these questions feel very natural in everyday conversation. When people talk about their day, they often ask questions like, "Were you at home last night?" Or "Were you tired after work?" Or "Was the restaurant busy?" These are the kinds of questions that appear constantly in real conversations. So understanding this difference between actions and descriptions isn't just a grammar trick, it's something that helps conversations flow more naturally.
Absolutely. And this is why many native speakers don't consciously think about these rules. Their brains simply recognize the type of idea they want to express. If the idea is an action, they use did. If the idea is a state or description, they use was or were. It becomes almost automatic once your brain starts noticing the difference between those two categories.
I want to test this idea with a few examples, because that's usually when learners start feeling more confident. Let's imagine I'm asking about yesterday. If I ask, "Did you work yesterday?" That's clearly an action. Working is something you do.
Exactly.
But if I ask, "Were you busy yesterday?" Now I'm describing a situation.
Right.
Or if I say, "Did you go to the gym yesterday?" That's again an action.
Correct?
But if I ask, "Were you at the gym yesterday?" Now the focus is the location, not the action.
Exactly. The difference is subtle, but it completely changes the grammar of the sentence.
And I think this is where many learners suddenly realize something important. English is not always about tense rules first. Very often it's about understanding what kind of idea you're expressing.
That's a great observation. If you start by asking yourself a simple question, is this an action or a description? Your brain will usually choose the correct structure automatically.
And the best part is that once you recognize this pattern, a lot of those confusing sentences suddenly make sense. Instead of memorizing dozens of grammar rules, you're simply noticing what type of information you're sharing in the conversation.
Exactly. But there is one last mistake that many learners make when they start understanding these ideas.
Let me guess. They try to combine everything together.
Exactly. They accidentally mix did with was or were in the same sentence.
Ah, yes. Sentences like "Did you were tired?"
Exactly. And that's the moment where English grammar suddenly starts sounding very strange.
So I have a feeling the next rule might be the most important one.
It is. In fact, it's probably the rule that will save learners from most of these mistakes.
So now that we've talked about actions and descriptions, I feel like the picture is finally starting to make sense. When we want to talk about something someone did, we use did and keep the verb simple. And when we want to describe a feeling, a condition, or a location, we use was or were. That part actually feels very logical now. But I also understand why learners get confused. Because when you're speaking quickly, your brain sometimes tries to combine everything together. You might start the sentence with did, and then suddenly another past word appears like was or were. And when that happens, the sentence suddenly sounds strange, even if you can't immediately explain why.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of the most important rules for speaking naturally in English. Once you choose did, you cannot use was or were in the same question. And the opposite is also true. If you start with was or were, you don't need did at all. The reason is actually very simple. These words are already carrying the idea of the past. When learners mix them together, the sentence ends up with two different past systems competing with each other. It's like two captains trying to steer the same ship. The result is confusion.
So when someone says something like, "Did you were tired yesterday?" the problem isn't just grammar, it's that two different structures are trying to control the same sentence.
Exactly. The sentence is trying to follow two paths at the same time. One path belongs to did, which is used for actions. The other belongs to was, where, which describes states. When you mix them, the structure collapses. That's why native speakers immediately feel that something sounds wrong, even if they can't explain the rule in technical terms.
That makes sense. So if I start with did, I must continue with an action verb, like go, eat, call, or watch. For example, did you watch the game yesterday? Did you call your friend? Did you finish your project? All of those feel natural because they follow the action pattern.
Exactly. And if the sentence is describing something instead of asking about an action, then we switch to was or were. For example, were you tired yesterday? Was the restaurant busy last night? Were they happy about the result? In these sentences, we're not asking about actions. We're asking about states or situations.
I think the big breakthrough for learners is realizing that these two patterns are actually very simple once you keep them separate. The trouble only begins when people start blending them together in the same sentence.
Exactly. And that's why a useful way to remember this rule is to imagine two completely different roads. One road is the action road, and that's where did lives. The other road is the description road, where was and were belong. If you stay on one road at a time, everything works perfectly. But the moment you try to drive on both roads at the same time, the sentence crashes.
I like that image. It makes the idea very easy to visualize. And once you start noticing it, you'll hear this pattern everywhere in real conversations.
Exactly. In fact, the best way to make this rule feel natural is to see it inside a real conversation, not just isolated examples.
Because that's when you can hear how the two patterns appear naturally while people are talking.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do next. Let's imagine a simple conversation about the weekend and see how did, was, and were appear naturally.
Okay, let's try something a little more realistic now. Because one thing I've noticed is that grammar often makes sense when we look at isolated examples. But the real challenge appears when we're actually speaking with someone. In real conversations, sentences don't come one by one like in a textbook. They appear naturally, and different structures start mixing together depending on what we want to say. So let's imagine a simple situation. We're meeting on Monday morning, and we're talking about our weekend. That's a perfect moment to hear how did, was, and were naturally appear in conversation.
That's a great idea. Conversations about the weekend are something people have everywhere, at work, at school, or even when meeting friends. And when we talk about our weekend, we naturally move between actions and descriptions. Sometimes we talk about things we did, and sometimes we talk about how things were. Let's imagine I start the conversation by asking you a simple question.
All right, go ahead.
So Anna, how was your weekend?
It was actually really nice. I finally had some time to relax, which was great because last week was extremely busy for me. I spent most of Saturday at home, catching up on sleep and watching a couple of movies. Nothing very exciting, but it was exactly what I needed after such a long week.
That sounds perfect. After a busy week, sometimes the best weekend is a quiet one. So let me ask you something. Did you go anywhere on Sunday? Or did you stay home the whole time?
On Sunday, I actually went out for a while. In the afternoon, I met a few friends at a small cafe near my apartment. The place was really cozy, and we spent a couple of hours just talking and enjoying the atmosphere. It wasn't a big event or anything like that, but it was one of those simple moments that makes a weekend feel really good.
That sounds great. Was the cafe busy, or was it a quiet place?
It was surprisingly quiet, actually. I think many people were still traveling or resting after the holidays, so the place felt very relaxed. The music was soft, the service was friendly, and the whole environment just made the afternoon feel peaceful.
That's the kind of place I love. Sometimes busy restaurants are exciting, but quiet cafes can be much more comfortable. So tell me something else. Did you try any good food while you were there?
Yes, I did. I ordered a slice of chocolate cake that was absolutely amazing. It was rich, but not too sweet, and the texture was perfect. One of my friends also ordered a fruit tart, and she said it was delicious too. So overall, the experience was great.
That sounds like a very successful cafe visit. And were your friends happy with the place too?
They were. In fact, we were all talking about how nice it was to find a place that felt calm and comfortable. Sometimes cafes are either too crowded or too loud, but this one had the perfect balance. By the time we left, we were already planning to go back another weekend.
That's the sign of a good place, when people want to return immediately. So after the cafe, did you do anything else? Or did you go home?
After that, we took a short walk around the neighborhood. The weather was nice, and the streets were full of small shops and parks, so it was a pleasant way to end the afternoon. Eventually, I went back home, made some tea, and spent the rest of the evening reading a book.
That sounds like a very balanced weekend. Relaxing, social, and peaceful. Honestly, weekends like that are sometimes much better than very busy ones.
And something interesting just happened in that conversation.
Exactly. Without thinking about grammar rules, we naturally use both patterns.
Whenever we talked about actions, we used did.
And whenever we described situations, feelings, or places, we used was or were.
And that's exactly how English works in real life. You know, something interesting happens when we step back and listen to that conversation again. None of those sentences felt complicated while we were speaking. We weren't stopping to think about grammar rules, and we weren't analyzing verbs in our heads. The sentences just appeared naturally because the ideas themselves were clear. Sometimes we were talking about things we did, like going to a cafe or ordering cake, and other times we were simply describing how things were, like the atmosphere of the cafe or how relaxed the afternoon felt.
Exactly. And that's really the most important thing we wanted to show in today's video. English grammar often looks complicated when it's presented as a list of rules. But when you step into a real conversation, the logic becomes much simpler. Your brain is constantly choosing between two types of ideas: actions and descriptions. If you're asking about something someone did, then did becomes the natural structure. And if you're describing a feeling, a situation, or a place in the past, then was or were becomes the natural choice.
And I think that realization is a huge relief for many learners. Because instead of memorizing long grammar tables, you can simply ask yourself one quick question while speaking. Am I talking about an action or am I describing a situation? Once you notice that difference, the sentence almost builds itself.
Exactly. And that's why so many people feel stuck when they study English only through rules and exercises. Their brain learns the information, but it doesn't learn how to use it in real conversations. What really helps fluency is recognizing patterns that appear again and again in everyday speech.
And once you start noticing those patterns, something interesting happens. You begin hearing them everywhere, in conversations, movies, podcasts, and even when people are simply talking about their day.
Exactly. So the next time you're speaking English and you want to ask about the past, try this simple approach. First, ask yourself, is this an action? If the answer is yes, your brain can naturally move toward did. But if you're describing how something felt, where someone was, or what a situation was like, then was or were will usually be the right path.
And the best part is that the more you practice hearing these patterns, the more automatic they become. Eventually, your brain stops translating and starts recognizing the structure instantly.
Exactly. And that's really what fluency feels like. Not remembering rules, but recognizing patterns.
Now, we'd love to hear from you. Try writing 2 short sentences in the comments below. First, write a question using did, and then write another one using was or were. It can be something simple about yesterday or last weekend.
That's a great way to test your understanding. And we always enjoy reading your examples because they show us what learners are thinking about while they practice.
And if this conversation helped make things clearer for you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to English Inside Out so you don't miss our next conversation.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Take care and keep practicing.
See you next time.